The sun dipped low over the golden fields, casting long shadows over the small African village, where life moved at a slow, steady rhythm. Lush green trees swayed in the gentle evening breeze, their whispers blending with the distant laughter of children playing barefoot on the dusty paths. This village was home to Zuena, a girl with a heart as warm as the sun above. She was known for her kindness, always ready to help, always carrying a soft smile despite the hardships she had faced. From the moment she could walk, Zuena had been her mother's shadow, following her through the fields, helping with the household chores, and listening to the wisdom in her mother's words. But fate had its own plans. One cruel night, sickness took her mother away, leaving behind an emptiness that no words could fill. The village mourned, but none felt the weight of the loss like Zuena. The house that once echoed with her mother's laughter now felt too quiet, too empty. Without her mother, Zuena had to grow up fast. She learned to do everything on her own, cooking, cleaning, even fetching water from the well, which was a long walk from her home. She missed the gentle touch of her mother's hand, the warmth of her embrace, the way she would hum lullabies under the moonlight. But Zuena did not complain. She carried on with quiet strength, her heart aching, but her spirit unbroken. The village elders often watched her with admiration. Despite her loss, she never let bitterness touch her soul. She still shared her food with the hungry, helped the elderly carry their firewood, and played with the younger children, telling them stories the way her mother once told her. The village was her family now, and though the pain of losing her mother never fully faded, she found comfort in the kindness she gave and received. But life was not always kind, and in the heart of the deep forests surrounding the village, something lurked, something that would soon test Zuena's courage in ways she never imagined. At first, Zuena thought it was a dream come true. For so long, the house had been quiet, missing the warmth of her mother's love. When her father, Jabari, introduced Nia to the village, everyone welcomed her with open arms. She was beautiful, with a smile that could melt hearts, and she spoke sweetly to Zuena, calling her "my dear child," and promising to take care of her like her own daughter. For the first time in a long while, Zuena felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would be better. The village celebrated the marriage with drums and dancing, and for a moment, laughter filled their home again. Nia cooked delicious meals, braided Zuena's hair, and told her bedtime stories. She held her hand in the market, introducing her as "our daughter," making everyone believe she was the perfect wife and mother. Zuena's father, who had spent years grieving, finally smiled again, believing he had made the right choice. But once the celebrations ended and the village returned to its usual rhythm, the mask began to slip. It started with small things: a sharp tone in Nia's voice when no one was around, a cold stare when Zuena made a mistake. Then, the kind words disappeared. No more sweet names, no more gentle touches. Instead, there were harsh commands. "Clean the house properly. Why are you so slow? Stop being lazy." At first, Zuena thought she'd done something wrong, that maybe she wasn't good enough. She tried harder, working from sunrise to sunset, hoping to please her stepmother. But it was never enough. Soon the chores became endless. While Nia sat comfortably under the shade, gossiping with the village women, Zuena scrubbed the floors, washed the clothes, cooked the meals, and fetched heavy pots of water from the well. If she made even the smallest mistake, Nia's voice would cut through the air like a whip. "Useless girl, can't you do anything right?" Zuena wanted to tell her father, but every time she tried, Nia's face would change. In front of Jabari, she was the perfect wife, full of love and kindness. She spoke sweetly about Zuena, calling her a hard-working little girl and praising her in public. If anyone in the village suspected anything, they said nothing. After all, Nia was always smiling, always acting as if she adored her stepdaughter. Jabari, tired from working in the fields all day, saw nothing. He trusted his wife, believing she was taking care of Zuena as promised. When Zuena hesitated to speak, afraid of making things worse, Nia's victory was sealed. Days turned into weeks into months, and Zuena's life became a silent struggle. She was exhausted, but she never complained. Even as her hands became rough from endless work, even as her feet ached from walking miles with heavy loads. She held onto her mother's memory, reminding herself to be strong, but deep inside, she knew this was no longer her home. This was a cage, and Nia was the one holding the key. The days of warm smiles and gentle words were gone. The woman who once called Zuena "my dear child" now looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. Nia had dropped the mask, and only Zuena could see the monster beneath. At dawn, before the first rooster's crow, Zuena was already awake, her body aching from the day before. The moment she stepped out of her small sleeping space, Nia's voice would cut through the morning air like a whip. "Lazy girl, the firewood won't collect itself." There was no breakfast waiting for her, no moment to rest. Her day had already begun, filled with endless work while the rest of the village still slept. She dragged her tired feet to the forest, where she gathered heavy bundles of wood, her small arms trembling under the weight. The path was long, the sun relentless, but she dared not return empty-handed. Nia's punishments were cruel, and Zuena had learned that pain was easier than defiance. When she finally made it back, sweat dripping from her face, she was given no time to breathe. "Grind the millet. We need flour for dinner." Nia's voice was sharp, her eyes filled with scorn. Zuena's hands, once soft, were now covered in blisters. She pounded the millet with a heavy stone, her muscles burning, her stomach empty. The rhythmic pounding echoed through the village, but no one questioned it. To the world, Zuena was just a hard-working girl, helping her family. Only she knew the truth. This was not help, this was slavery. Meanwhile, Abeni, Nia's daughter, lived like a queen. She lounged in the shade, eating the sweetest fruits, her hands never touching a single chore. Her dresses were clean and bright, untouched by dust or sweat. If she wanted water, Zuena had to fetch it. If she wanted fresh food, Zuena had to cook it. And if anything went wrong, if the firewood was damp, if the food was late, if a pot cracked, Zuena was the one punished. The worst part wasn't even the work. It was the way Abeni looked at her, with amusement, with pity, as if Zuena were nothing more than a stray dog meant to serve. "Why do you look so tired, sister?" Abeni would ask with a smirk, watching Zuena struggle with a pot too heavy for her small frame. "You should be grateful mother lets you stay here." Grateful, that word burned more than any slap. Zuena wanted to scream, to tell her father, to make someone, anyone, see what was happening. But every time she opened her mouth, Nia was there, smiling sweetly in front of others, acting like the perfect mother. "Zuena is learning to be a strong woman," she would say, patting her head in front of the villagers. "She is such a good girl, always helping." And the villagers nodded, believing the lie. At night, when the world was silent, Zuena lay on the cold floor, her body too tired to move. Her hands throbbed, her back ached, but she did not cry. She had learned that tears changed nothing, but deep inside, something was growing, a fire, a whisper, a silent scream waiting to be heard. Because Zuena knew one thing: this was not her fate, this was not her end. The first time Zuena dared to protest, she learned the true extent of Nia's cruelty. It was a simple plea. She had just returned from the well, her feet aching from the long walk, her arms sore from carrying the heavy pots of water. She asked for a moment to rest. That was all. But Nia's face darkened like a brewing storm. Without a word, she grabbed Zuena by the arm and dragged her inside. The slap came so fast, so hard, that Zuena barely had time to react before she was on the floor, her cheek burning. "You dare talk back?" Nia's voice was ice. "You are nothing. You eat because I allow it. You sleep under this roof because I allow it. Without me, you are no one." From that day on, Zuena understood. Her voice meant nothing in this house. Whenever she made a mistake, no matter how small, the punishments were swift and merciless. If she spilled a drop of water while carrying the heavy pots, Nia would force her to refill them again and again until her arms trembled with exhaustion. If she did not grind the millet fast enough, Nia would take away her food, letting her go to bed hungry, while Abeni feasted on roasted meat and sweet mangoes. But the worst punishment of all was the nights outside. Whenever Nia was in a particularly foul mood, she would grab Zuena by the wrist and shove her out of the house, slamming the wooden door shut behind her. The first time it happened, Zuena pounded on the door, begging to be let back in, but Nia only laughed from inside. Sleep with the animals if you want a home so badly. And so, Zuena did. She curled up beside the goats, their warm bodies the only comfort she had against the cold night air. The ground was rough, the smell strong, but it was better than nothing. She would shiver under the open sky, watching the stars, wondering if her mother could see her from wherever she was. Some nights, the hyenas howled from the distance, their eerie laughter sending chills down her spine. She would press herself closer to the goats, praying they would not come closer. She was just a child, but she knew, out there in the dark, she was nothing more than prey. But no matter how much she suffered, Zuena never cried in front of Nia. She refused to give her that satisfaction. She swallowed her pain, clenched her fists, and told herself to endure, because one day she would be free. One day, Nia would regret ever thinking she could break her. Zuena had always believed her father would protect her. He was strong, respected in the village, a man who carried wisdom in his eyes. But love made even the strongest men blind. Every evening, when Jabari returned from the fields, covered in sweat and dust, Nia greeted him with a warm smile, a bowl of cool water, and sweet words. She played the role of a devoted wife perfectly, her voice soft, her eyes full of love. And when Jabari asked about Zuena, Nia would sigh, shaking her head as if burdened by disappointment. "She is lazy," Nia would say. "She refuses to listen, always running off when there's work to do." Jabari frowned, confused. His daughter had never been disobedient. She had always been kind, always eager to help. But Nia's words were like poison, dripping slowly into his mind, twisting his thoughts. "She is still a child," he would murmur, trying to defend her. Nia sighed again, louder this time, making sure he could see her frustration. "A child who needs discipline. You are too soft with her, Jabari. That is why she has become this way. She disrespects me, refuses to work, and expects to be treated like a princess." Jabari's tired eyes flickered with doubt. He wanted to believe Nia, wanted to trust that she was taking care of his daughter. But deep down, something felt wrong. He saw the way Zuena flinched when Nia was near, the way she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. He noticed the bruises on her arms, the way she ate as if she had been starving for days. And yet, every time he opened his mouth to question it, Nia was there with another lie. "She fell while playing," she would say if he noticed the bruises. "She refuses to eat when I serve her food," she would explain when he saw her hunger. "She is testing you, Jabari. She wants to turn you against me." And slowly, doubt became belief. One evening, when Zuena finally gathered the courage to speak, to tell her father the truth, he silenced her with a tired sigh. "Enough, Zuena. Stop this nonsense." His voice was firm, but exhausted. "Your stepmother takes care of you. Why must you make trouble?" Zuena felt her heart crack, not from the punishments or the beatings, but from the realization that her father would not save her. He had already chosen whom to believe. She looked at him, hoping, praying that he would see the truth in her eyes. But Jabari only looked away, his face clouded with guilt. He was not a cruel man, not a heartless father, but love had wrapped its fingers around his throat, making him deaf to his daughter's suffering. And in that moment, Zuena understood. She was alone. The sun hung heavy in the sky, burning everything beneath it. The air was dry, the earth cracked, and the village felt like a giant oven. Zuena, exhausted from her endless chores, struggled to carry the last pot of water from the well. Her arms ached, her feet were sore, and her throat was as dry as the dusty ground. But she kept moving, knowing that if she slowed down, Nia's wrath would follow. Just as she reached the house, a weak voice called out to her, "Child, water please." She turned to see an old man sitting under a wilting tree. His clothes were tattered, his skin darkened by years under the sun, and his frail body looked as if the wind could carry him away. His lips were cracked, his hands trembling as he reached out weakly. Zuena hesitated. She had so little strength left. If Nia saw her wasting time, she would be punished again. But something inside her refused to ignore him. She knew hunger. She knew thirst. She knew what it felt like to be forgotten. Slowly, she knelt beside the old man and poured some water into a small wooden cup. "Drink," she whispered, holding it to his lips. He sipped slowly, sighing in relief, his tired eyes meeting hers with something deep, something knowing. "You have a kind heart, child," he murmured, wiping his mouth, "even when the world has been unkind to you." Zuena looked away, ashamed of the tears threatening to form in her eyes. No one had spoken to her like that in years. The old man reached into his worn-out pouch and pulled out a small, smooth stone, no bigger than a pebble. It shimmered faintly, almost as if it held a secret light within. He pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers over it gently. "This is for you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zuena frowned. "I don't need anything," she said, trying to give it back. He smiled, shaking his head. "This is not a gift. It is a blessing. When the time comes, it will reveal its power." Before she could ask what he meant, he stood up, his movements suddenly stronger, as if the water had given him new life. Without another word, he walked away, disappearing into the dusty horizon. Zuena looked down at the stone, confused but strangely comforted. It was warm against her skin, pulsing softly, as if alive. She didn't understand what had just happened, but deep in her heart, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. At first, Zuena didn't notice anything strange. The small stone the old man had given her remained tucked safely in the folds of her dress, warm against her skin, but she assumed it was just her imagination. Days passed, and life remained the same, hard, unforgiving, and filled with endless labor. Then, one evening, while grinding millet, something unusual happened. Her tired hands worked the heavy stone against the grain, her arms aching from exhaustion. But when she lifted the grinding stone, her breath caught in her throat. The millet underneath shimmered, its dull brown grains now glistening like tiny golden seeds. Her heart pounded. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, but it was real. The millet had turned into pure gold. Fear gripped her. Had she imagined it? Was she cursed? She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. She hid the golden grains beneath the regular ones and continued working, her mind racing. But the next day, something else happened. While carrying a broken clay pot to the river, her fingers brushed against the cracked edges. Right before her eyes, the clay transformed, hardening into solid gold. The once fragile pot was now heavy and gleamed under the sun. Zuena gasped, nearly dropping it. It wasn't a dream. It was happening. She tested it in secret. A small twig she touched became a golden rod. A simple stone she picked up turned into a lump of gold. She couldn't understand it, but one thing was clear. Whatever she touched changed. And soon, others began to notice. One afternoon, while struggling to carry a bundle of firewood, Abeni shoved her aside, laughing cruelly. "You should be faster, or Mother will punish you again." Zuena clenched her fists, trying to ignore the anger burning inside her. But as she reached for the fallen firewood, her fingers barely brushed against the dry branches before they glowed, shifting into pure gold. Abeni's laughter stopped. Her eyes widened in shock. What did you do?" she whispered, stepping back. Zuena snatched her hands away, fear gripping her. I don't know." But it was too late. Abeni had seen it. And in a house ruled by greed and cruelty, a secret like this was dangerous. Word spread fast. The villagers whispered about the girl with the golden touch. Some said she was blessed by the gods. Others believed she had made a deal with dark spirits. Wherever she went, eyes followed her, filled with awe, envy, and fear. And deep in her heart, Zuena knew her life would never be the same again. The moment Nia learned of Zuena's gift, her eyes burned with greed. Gold, endless gold. The thought consumed her. If Zuena, a mere girl, could turn ordinary things into riches, then why should she, the mistress of the house, live in struggle? At first she acted sweet, her voice dripping with false kindness. "My dear Zuena," she cooed, stroking the girl's arm, a touch that once only delivered pain. "You have been hiding such a wonderful blessing from your own family. Don't you see? This is a gift meant to bring us fortune. Zuena remained silent. She knew this wasn't love. It was hunger. Nia wasted no time. She made Zuena touch anything and everything, firewood, pots, baskets, even the dirt beneath their feet, hoping to turn their home into a palace of gold. But no matter how much wealth they gained, it was never enough. Then came the strangers. Greedy men from neighboring villages arrived, their hands eager, their eyes glinting with the same hunger that burned in Nia's soul. They offered gifts, begged for favors. Some even demanded that Zuena touch their belongings and turn them into gold. But Zuena refused. "No more," she said, her voice firm for the first time. Nia's mask of kindness shattered. Her true nature roared back to life. "You ungrateful girl!" she spat, grabbing Zuena by the arm. "After everything I've done for you, you dare deny me!" She locked Zuena away, furious at losing her golden opportunity, but her greed was too strong to be contained. If Zuena wouldn't obey, then Abeni would take her place. "You will serve them," Nia ordered her daughter, shoving her toward the waiting men. "If Zuena received a blessing, then you will too." Abeni hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "But mother, what if—" "Do as I say," Nia snapped. Trembling, Abeni reached out and touched a clay pot, just as Zuena had before. But instead of glowing gold, the pot crumbled into fine dust. The wind carried it away in an instant, as if it had never existed. The crowd gasped. Nia's eyes widened in shock. "Try again," she barked, shoving Abeni forward. "Touch something else." Abeni touched a wooden stool. Dust. A basket. Dust. A jug of water. It evaporated before her eyes. Panic set in. The crowd murmured, stepping back in fear. "She is cursed," someone whispered. Abeni screamed, staring at her hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Everything she touched was turning to nothing. Nia lunged forward, grabbing her daughter's shoulders. "No, this isn't right. It was supposed to be a blessing." But as her fingers gripped Abeni's arms, something terrible happened. Abeni's skin began to dry, crack, and turn to dust. "No, no!" Nia shrieked, pulling away. But it was too late. The curse had spread. The villagers watched in horror as Nia, the woman who had once controlled everything, fell to the ground, coughing, her body withering like old parchment. Her screams turned into a dry whisper. And then, nothing. She was gone. All that remained was a pile of dust, carried away by the wind. The wind carried away the last traces of Nia, leaving only a silence heavier than any punishment. The villagers stood frozen, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Abeni, once pampered and cruel, fell to her knees, staring at her hands as if they had betrayed her. Everything she touched still crumbled into dust. The golden life she had enjoyed was gone, replaced by a nightmare she could never escape. She turned to the villagers, her voice desperate. "Help me, please!" But they only stepped back. Who would dare touch someone cursed? Jabari arrived moments later, his face twisted with confusion. "What happened?" he demanded. But as his eyes swept over the remains of his wife and the terrified figure of his daughter, realization crashed into him like a storm. He had been blind. He had ignored the truth, dismissed Zuena's suffering, and chosen to believe the lies of a woman who never truly loved him. He turned to his daughter, who now stood tall, her once weary face glowing with quiet strength. The same girl he had abandoned, the same girl he had let suffer under Nia's cruel hands, was now someone the entire village respected. Tears filled his eyes as he fell to his knees. "Zuena, my child, I was wrong." His voice broke. "Forgive me." For the first time, Zuena saw the father she had longed for, the man who should have protected her, who should have believed in her. But it was too late. Wounds that deep did not heal with mere words. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned away. The villagers watched as she walked past the home that had once been her prison, past the people who had once ignored her suffering. She was no longer the helpless girl who carried burdens that weren't hers. She was free. Abeni sobbed, reaching out toward her. "Please, don't leave me like this." But Zuena never looked back. The world had taken everything from her once, but now she held the power, and she chose to walk away. Zuena left without looking back, her steps light, as if shedding the weight of years of suffering. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, yet she felt richer than ever. The village that once ignored her pain now whispered her name with awe. They had seen cruelty turn to dust, had witnessed karma unfold before their very eyes, and now they watched the girl who had been treated like a servant rise above it all. Time passed, and stories of Zuena spread far beyond the village. She did not use her power for greed, nor did she seek revenge. Instead, she traveled to places where the weak were crushed under the feet of the powerful, where the helpless had no voice. She used her gift to help the suffering, turning their burdens into gold, literally and figuratively. She built homes for the homeless, gave food to the hungry, and made sure no child would ever endure what she had. Soon, she became more than just a girl with a mysterious blessing. She became a legend. But while Zuena's name shone like the gold she created, Nia and Abeni's fate took a darker path. The curse never lifted. Everything Abeni touched still turned to dust, and no one dared come near her. Her beauty, once her pride, faded under the weight of misery and hunger. The villagers, who had once envied her, now pitied her, or worse, feared her. Nia, once a woman of cunning and power, was reduced to nothing. With no wealth, no servants, and no home, she wandered from village to village, begging for food, for shelter, for mercy. But none came. The same hands that once forced Zuena to toil now trembled in desperation. One day, as they sat by the roadside, covered in dust and rags, Abeni turned to her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did this happen to us?" Nia had no answer. Far away, in a grand home filled with warmth and kindness, Zuena sat by a fire, listening to the laughter of children she had saved from suffering. She had no anger left for the past, only wisdom, and in the village where it all began, people still spoke of her, the girl who turned her pain into power, the girl who walked away from cruelty and built something greater, the girl who became a legend. And that, my friends, is the power of karma. Zuena's story reminds us that strength isn't about revenge, it's about rising above. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Your support means everything. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.